Amazing. Fabulous, guys. Well, welcome everyone again to the first iteration of the World Unit Forum. So far, everything's been going really, really well. Lovely to see everyone's presentations thus far too. So I guess what we're doing today is we're going to be doing a bit of a dive into the New Zealand dollar, but as well as that, I think we're sort of taking stock of where we actually are relative to the currency of this country and others that I'll be exploring later as well. Sort of where we've come from, where we are, and potentially what the future actually looks like. And I think one thing that I found interesting with the research that I've been doing is despite the different economies, the different cultures, and the different socioeconomic factors of the countries that I actually explored, there do seem to be some, dare I even say, disturbing similarities between how some of these economies are actually beginning to unfold and where we're sort of headed to at the moment. And I think what we're sort of facing now around the world is this sort of technological level of innovation, which I think is rather telling of a lot of the new technology that we're actually seeing as one part. But the second thing is how that's actually going to sort of drive a lot of the changes that we are likely to see in the world as well. Because I think there are a lot of broken models that they're outdated. They can definitely do with a refresh now that we actually have systems in place to allow some of these changes to take place. But yeah, we'll have a look at that all a little bit later on. But for now, I think let's get into it. So I actually was born in South Africa, but I moved to New Zealand when I was about 6 with my family. And I lived there for about 10 years. And I have to say, it is a beautiful country filled with beautiful people as well. And I guess one of the benefits I had with my family is that we did actually move quite a lot. So in my 10 years there, I attended a bunch of different schools, not because I was naughty or anything like that, but just because my family moved a lot. And so I got to see like a pretty wide, well, I had a pretty varied experience of New Zealand as a whole. But when I was actually there, the population was only around 4 million. So in the 10 years that I've been gone, the population of New Zealand has actually increased by 25%, which is actually pretty insane. But it's also fair enough because I think it's now becoming quite a hotspot for a lot of business people and even billionaires as well, which we can look into later. But yeah, as you see here, it's a very isolated little landmass, not too far away from Australia. And yeah, I think this is also probably why it was one of the last major landmasses actually settled by humans as well, just due to its relative isolation. So a brief history of New Zealand currency. So the use of coins in New Zealand actually goes back to the early 1800s when currencies from around the world were traded based on their metal content, which I think is like a pretty fair way of actually going about things, because at that point in human history, gold, silver, bronze were basically the assets of choice, or value exchange assets of choice. 1840, Captain William Robson, RN, the first governor of New Zealand, extended British laws to New Zealand, and with this, the standard gold, silver, bronze British coins were actually allowed to circulate freely in New Zealand as well. 1870, the British coin became the first legal tender coin of New Zealand. At that time, it was already one of 2 common currencies, along with the Australian minted gold sovereign and half sovereign coins. And let me just minimize this here. February 1st, 1935, British coins were ceased to be legal tender, and New Zealand then became the last and most remote of the self-governing dominions of the British Commonwealth to introduce its own coinage. 1967, New Zealand changed its coinage from the Imperial British Standard to the decimal system in use today. This was also done in tandem with Australia, which we'll actually be exploring in the Australian presentation later as well. And the designs on the coins reflected the wonderful heritage and cultural icons of New Zealand, from the last surviving member of an otherwise extinct family of reptiles, the tuatara, to a representation of the Maori koruru, carved head, which adorns the whare or meeting houses. And as a kind of like even a broader level note here, one thing I've also really liked about New Zealand is they do put a wonderful emphasis on adorning certain official documents as well. Like my New Zealand passport, every time I'm actually handing it to airport hostess or something like this and actually have to do the check-in. If they hadn't seen one before, they're always blown away because they are really beautiful. It's got this wonderful sort of silver fern going on. So I think that's just, I appreciate that about New Zealand as well. And yeah, here we can see the notes, the 5, 10, 20, 50, and 100 along with the coins. And you can see here that this is the little kiwi, the tuatara, and some of the traditional masks and whatnot as well. So New Zealand has an advanced and free market economy. So it's actually ranked 14th in the 2019 Human Development Index and 3rd in the 2020 Index of Economic Freedom, and is a high income economy with a nominal gross domestic product per capita of $36,254 US. Historically, attractive industries have contributed, or extractive rather, industries have contributed strongly to New Zealand's economy, focusing at different times on sealing, whaling, flax, gold, kauri gum, and native timber. And some of the native timber in New Zealand actually is some of the best in the world. And in fact, they also have some of the oldest forests. There's some really gorgeous old growth forests there as well. High demand for agricultural products from the United Kingdom and the United States helps New Zealanders achieve high standards of living in both Australia and Western Europe in the 1950s to 1980s. So 2020 to 2021, it's been an interesting time, but consumer spending has only increased in New Zealand. I think this is potentially due to the fact that New Zealand mitigated most of the economic impact of lockdowns because they, I guess being such a small island, managed to get on top of the whole pandemic a lot faster than other countries actually did. And so therefore, they were also getting stimulus checks or packages or payments, however you want to call it, from the government as well. So I always find that that is going to be one way to very quickly bolster or promote consumer spending, free money, nothing quite like it. So yeah, we can move on from there. In 2020, New Zealand was recorded as the #1 country in the world for ease of doing business, with the shortest time to start a business and the first in the world for corruption transparency. Now, I can't really speak to this personally. I left when I was 15, so I haven't actually had an opportunity to set it up, but my dad definitely had a lot of different businesses going on. And still to this day, he's recently moved to Australia, but still to this day, often tells me about the certain like libertarian attitude of the government towards business there as well, which I am yet to check out, but perhaps one day. So growth in New Zealand venture capital markets has also been strong in 2018. There was 111 million New Zealand dollars were invested in seed and early stage ventures. This is an increase of 28% from the previous year, which is pretty solid. Currently, there are 529,000 small to medium enterprises in New Zealand, which in comparison to its population is actually rather high. As we saw earlier, there's actually 5 million people in New Zealand, so this is a pretty solid percentage of that who are actually being entrepreneurial here, which is awesome. So which industries contribute most to New Zealand's GDP? So as of 2018, it was 289 billion New Zealand dollars, which for a country of its size is actually pretty good. And we can see here, professional, scientific, and technical services are actually taking the lead at the moment. Previously, it used to be extractive services, as we kind of saw earlier as well, but this is now taking a turn as, I guess, we're approaching a more digitized economy, or yeah, just kind of the development of some of these industries as well. We have retail, hiring, and real estate services, construction, owner-occupied property operation, financial and insurance services, healthcare and social assistance, wholesale and trade, transport, postal and warehousing, retail and trade, and agriculture at the bottom, which was also a very, very high ranking industry previously, because there used to be a lot of export to China and definitely to Europe as well. Australia, New Zealand had very coveted dairy products as well. So the New Zealand Exchange, the NZX, has provided an average return of 6.4% a year since 1990, which is one of the best performing stock exchanges in the world over the last 120 years. So that is definitely pretty awesome. Some of New Zealand's largest companies include Xero, Fisher & Paykel Healthcare, Meridian Energy, Auckland Airport, Mainfreight, Spark, Fonterra, and New Zealand, and then the big banks of New Zealand as well. So New Zealand is identified as one of the world's most stable and well-governed states. And I think this speaks to what my dad still continues to tell me as well. And as of 2017, the country was ranked fourth in the strength of its democratic institutions and first in government transparency and lack of corruption. A 2017 human rights report led by the US Department of State noted that New Zealand government generally respected the rights of individuals, but voiced concerns regarding the social status of the Maori population. And so this is definitely true with New Zealand, as it is with pretty much almost every other country that has had colonization. There is this this difficulty between the native population and the introduced population as well. And while I think New Zealand actually probably dealt with this best because they actually got a treaty signed back in the day, so they actually have very strong and protected land rights, definitely more so than the Aboriginal population in Australia. There is definitely still some racism and some social tension as well, because there is a class difference as well between the majority of the Maori population and the Caucasians. So import and export in New Zealand totals 81.7 billion in 2019. Trade with China actually represented 33 billion of this total and stands as New Zealand's largest trading partner. No surprise there. New Zealand also has entered into free trade agreements, the ASEAN, Canada, Chile, South Korea, Malaysia. I don't know why New Zealand is in there because that is definitely the same country. Peru, Japan, Singapore, Thailand, and the United States. So definitely a very open economy and definitely servicing and exporting, as well as doing a lot of import too. New Zealand has 214,000 people in top 1% of global wealth and 1.97 million in the top 10%. So it is definitely a first world country as far as things go, and everyone has a relatively high standard of living. Again, there is definitely some disparity in the lower percentiles, but I think this is ultimately, good progress is getting made. I guess, the biggest fortunes to appear are in manufacturing and the deal-making industries, merchant banking, brokerage, insurance, real estate, property development. Nearly 3/4 of the fortunes were self-made. In 2020, the Credit Suisse Global Wealth Report for New Zealand ranked New Zealand fourth for the highest median wealth per adult. So that's $171,000 per adult, which is very, very high, given some of the other countries I was exploring as well. New Zealand's median wealth was up 7,180 per adult from the year before. So I'm not sure exactly what this speaks to in terms of how the government's actually been trying to offset the economic problems with the pandemic. I know that the New Zealand government has actually been printing a lot of money as well, and ultimately debasing the value of their currency, as almost every country in the world is at this point in time. But nevertheless, still a very high standard. And so, only 10% of New Zealanders had a net worth below $10,000 compared to 29% in the US and 70% for the world as a whole. So again, country is doing very well for itself. And here we are, government debt. Now, this is something we're going to see pervasive through almost every single presentation that I'm going to be giving today. And some countries are definitely a lot worse off than others in this respect at the moment. But New Zealand has done a remarkable amount of currency creation in this point in time. And we can literally just see that from 2019 to 2020, it's more than actually doubled its total monetary supply. So that is pretty freaky. Household debt in New Zealand increased to 97.6% of GDP in the fourth quarter of 2020. So that is, again, a pretty solid increase we're seeing as well. So I guess this is due to, again, the pandemic. We're going to have to see how things actually level out in the years that follow as the world hopefully starts to get back to normal. But again, just a concerning increase here. So the digitization of New Zealand's economy, systems, and procedures. So I would say that, at least in my experience, I did leave when I was 15, but any interaction that I had with social services or sort of government services was extremely smooth and was definitely extremely modern. I would say even more so than what was happening in Australia when we ended up moving there later. But New Zealand is just on the pulse of changes and updates. There is quite a progressive politician, or prime minister rather, Jacinta Ardern, who is making some very good changes on this side of things to kind of help facilitate and smooth out a lot of the sort of social services, I guess. And I did actually read somewhere that this was actually a while ago, I couldn't find the article, but they're looking closely at allowing a more sort of digitized voting system as well, where you can actually vote for certain things via your phone. You don't have to go to the little stations they set up when it's time to vote and fill out the ballots, like they do back in the day. So digital is about more than just improving IT systems and processes. In the broader sense, it means doing things differently in an increasingly connected world. So using new mindsets, skill sets, technologies, and data to benefit people, government, and the economy. So again, it comes here, they're definitely liberal of mind, and I do hope they can actually do some good stuff with this, because I know that digitization of these systems can be done in a good way, and it can also be done in a bad way. It just really depends on what sort of systems they actually end up implementing to manage all of this stuff. So it'll be interesting to see how that unfolds. Crypto adoption in New Zealand. So this time last year, the decentralized finance, also known as DeFi space, had 1.5 billion in funds locked in financial applications powered by public blockchains. Today, there is over 150 billion in funds that have poured into these applications, and the pace is not slowing down. So this is definitely representative of an exponential adoption curve. Again, this is something that we're going to see in a lot of the countries, especially in the third world countries that I'll be addressing later as well, because I think that citizens of third world countries really have the most to gain from what blockchain and what currencies or assets rather like Bitcoin can actually offer, because it really gives some sort of stability, and ultimately their options are so limited. And over the time that a lot of these economies have actually been going, they've just seen debasement happen again and again. There's been these boom and these busts. And at some point you realize that if we continue to do the same things again and again, well, the definition of doing the same thing again and again and expecting a different result is, of course, insanity. So here, our research has revealed that 38.2% of adult New Zealanders currently use or plan to use micro-investing platforms. That is about 1.5 million Kiwis, and it reflects a transformational shift in how we are choosing to invest our money. So this is really cool. And again, I just want to stress, New Zealand has a 5 million population, so these numbers are actually pretty substantial. So in conclusion here, billions are changing hands via New Zealand's digital currency exchanges. In 2020, the estimated total value of digital currency trading, buying and selling of cryptocurrencies in New Zealand was around $2.9 billion. Market growth has moved from incremental to exponential, and that is specific to the crypto market adoption. Purchase of crypto assets in New Zealand has more than doubled in the past 12 months. Again, very huge. The average value of a cryptocurrency trade in February 2019 was $300. By the end of 2020, it was around $1,500. And New Zealand decentralized exchanges are growing rapidly to keep pace with the market. So companies based in New Zealand like Easy Crypto, which is New Zealand's largest crypto exchange, and Independent Reserve have seen a huge spike in new users and investments, making them some of the fastest growing companies actually in the history of New Zealand. So this is really, really cool. I'm really happy to see this actually starting to unfold. Now, as part of the unit network, we're going to be issuing a series of stable tokens, a series of city tokens, and a series of industry tokens. My apologies here, you'll actually see on this phone, I've actually still got the AUDU token, so just please swap that up for the New Zealand one. But there's going to be a total supply of the stable token of 100 million. And now the NZDU is a decentralized stable token issued by units and is importantly backed by digital assets instead of fiat. So for anyone that has invested in crypto, you're going to have heard about stable tokens like USDT, USDC. Essentially, they deal with the collateralization in different ways, but ultimately what they're doing is they're taking fiat, or they say they're taking fiat, and then they lock it into a bank or different accounts, and then they use that to substantiate the creation of the USDT or the USDC. So the issue with this is you can definitely have opaque accounting. So USDT is notorious for this. They've actually been in a myriad of different court cases to actually try and have their books audited to prove that they're actually holding what they say they're holding. They say they won the case, but if you actually look at what really happened, all of the big banks in New York have declined to actually accept or to work with USDT simply because they couldn't reach a resolve where the banks, the traditional banks, felt like there was actually honest business taking place. So I'm not sure exactly how USDT are going to deal with this, but the way that Unit is approaching the stable tokens is, yeah, we're going to basically use digital assets. So at this point in time, the platform allows for 7 different digital assets that can actually be used to collateralize the value of the tokens that we issue. So as an example, let's say I buy $50,000 worth of NZ, or 50,000 tokens worth, my apologies, of the NZDU using Bitcoin. And we say that Bitcoin has a price of 50,000 New Zealand dollars at this point. So therefore the NZDU token is 1-for-1 backed. So what I've just used to buy the Bitcoin sits in the bank of the NZDU token. And if the Bitcoin actually increases in value to $100,000 per Bitcoin, the NZDU token holders don't actually get the upside. So the NZDU tokens that I hold, if I'm still holding my 50,000, are not worth any more. The token bank is just simply over collateralized. And so this basically means that also if the price drops, then the NZDU bank reserves are only used to buy back the stable token if it is 2 times over collateralized. Otherwise, it will just let it drop and wait until the underlying collateral recovers. But there are definitely some higher level notes that we actually have to go through to fully unpack how these stable tokens work. So this sort of goes beyond the scope of this presentation, at least now. But over the course of the next few weeks and months, as the platform is actually beginning to roll out and launch, we're going to be doing some deep dives into all of the different stable tokens to give everyone a very clear understanding of how they actually all work and come together. But yeah, thank you very much for tuning in, everyone.